Hi, I am Sophia Wang. I am the co-founder and chief of culture at MycoWorks. And as far as what kind of bioengineer I am, I would say I am a cultural engineer of people within a biotechnology company. Sure, yeah. So as chief of culture of MycoWorks, I set the values of the company and the culture that we're building here, and I make sure that we operationalize those values in the way that we work together as people and coworkers, and also in our partnerships with brands and consumers out in the world. So as far as an ethos of bioengineering and how that applies, in a metaphoric way, I guess, to what you typically think of as bioengineering, I think of it as, everything is a living system and everything can be considered a living organism. So if you think of a startup as a baby company that has, very basic capabilities that you're trying to steer and grow into a grown-up company that has really robust systems for supporting everything that you need to do as a company, whether it's, problem solving technical issues with the product, or it's making sure that everyone gets paid on time regularly. um, all of that are like skills that an organism that is a young company needs to learn. And so I think of the company very much as a living organism that is growing. And why not? Because it's made up of people. We've got 160 people working for MycoWorks today. We started out as a couple people in a basement in an art studio in San Francisco. So for me, it's very much a human system that has been growing continuously and will continue to do so. If you think about how that translates to bioengineering in the more traditional sense, you absolutely have to think about your systems in the same way. You have a biological system that is responsive to environmental, physical inputs and produces its own outputs, has its own growth dynamics, has its own chemical reactions, can be looked at the atomic level, can be looked at the macro level. And so how do you make sure that you have a handle on all of that in order to steer in a beneficial and non-destructive way? I think growing culture is very similar in that respect. There's ethics and responsibility, and also mechanics and analysis and close observation and responsiveness to like relational dynamics that's involved in all of that. Sure. Well, it maybe helps to talk about the origin story of the company. This is an example of where our technology started. And if I had a mushroom in my other hand, I don't actually have one right now. That would be the other origin. So essentially, MycoWorks is making a mycelial option for leather. And the products that we make today, and we actually, our product is more like this, which is a sheet of material. So this is one of our finished sheets of mycelium leather alternative. And we sell that to brands and they make stuff like this. So this is one of the direct consumer products that we released this year with a hat designer in LA named Nick Fouquet. And this is 100% our material. So this is mycelium. And backing up, mycelium, for those who don't know, refers to the root fibers of mushrooms. So if you think of mushrooms as the fruit of an organism, mycelium is it's kind of like the roots and the branches and the stem. It's the vegetative part of the organism, and mushrooms are the fruiting body. So where this all started was back in the 90s and the 2000s. My co-founder, Phil Ross, was starting to use mycelium as a material for art and design, and was making essentially, structural materials, architectural materials that he would cast into form. So we like build a mold, put your wood sawdust or wood chips plus mycelium, spawn plus, nutrition and a little water, and you can grow mycelium into any shape that you want. And it's lightweight and it's strong. And it seems like an amazing material for design and architecture and art objects. So Phil was working in the space of art and art objects and art exhibits for 10, 15 years or so, and started to get interest from companies around the world that actually wanted to use these materials in their products. So Phil and I had connected in the Bay Area in the 2007 or so as artist collaborators. We worked together on an exhibit on the history of biotechnology as something that humans have been practicing for a long time. If you think about plant cultivation or like baking bread or making beer, like that's all biotech, right? So we put an exhibit together based on the history of biotechnology, had a good working relationship. Around 2012, Phil's like, hey, there's companies around the world that want to use my art material in their products. So let's start a company so that we can make this technology available to these companies, these global corporations. So that's how the company was started. And we founded it in 2013. So in 2023, that will be 10 years of basically trying to scale this technology from an artist's handcraft, something that Phil was doing in his art studio by hand with his artist assistants, into something that we can replicate at a large scale in a factory with semi-mechanization and semi-automation. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. We make beautiful things with artists and brands now. This is a limited edition pin that we made to commemorate some award I won this year. And, we have, it's a material that can be fabricated and worked with like leather. So we like to show objects like this to show that you can sew and fabricate and glue it the way that you can with leather. And it's non-animal, non-plastic. So a lot of brands are interested in it. So that's what we do. And there's a lot more to say, but I'll pause. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say that we do have a lab at MicroWorks, but that's not where their product is getting made. The lab is where we are doing technology development. So either understanding, from a mycological perspective, how the species of fungus that we're using can be steered in the way that we want. We do have a manufacturing facility here in Emeryville, California, where the product gets made. And so it's not so much a day in the lab as it is a day in the factory. And that basically starts with preparing your substrate that the fungus wants to eat. And that's really just wood chips, wood sawdust. You amend with things that are going to make it optimal for the fungus to grow. That's typically a little bit of water, some nutrients. You put it into an autoclave, so something that can go up to really to basically sterilize the substrate to make sure that there's no competing organisms in it. They're going to compete with our fungus for the food. Once it cools down, the substrate, we inoculate it with fungal spawn, and it gets put into a tray, about 2 by 3 feet tray. That's the size of our current unit. It has a lid, and it allows for gas exchange, and also allows for us to control the gas exchange, as well as temperature, humidity, and light, of course, in the room in which it's growing. And then the tray moves through our, storage and racking system for a number of weeks. And there's some magic things that happen proprietary to what we do while it's growing to make sure that it is grown to the strengths and the specifications that we want. This is a really interesting step because this is a stage at which of customization. So For instance, some customers that we work with want a certain kind of strength or flexibility in the material. So as the mycelium is growing, by basically colonizing the wood substrate, and then it effectively grows a skin, or we call it a hide, on top of the wood substrate mass. So this is a point at which we can customize. So some brands want a certain strength or flexibility. We can add a textile layer onto the substrate and the mycelium that's growing. Mycelium will grow up through the textile to interweave itself into the textile to create a true composite. And so then you have a mycelium sheet that has embedded and woven into it another textile. So we've done a lot of cool things, experiments, just to show that we can do it. We've grown mycelium sheet with a copper fiber so that you can have a wired, a smart fabric. Or we've grown a mycelium sheet with a piece of Kevlar fabric, so you can approach a bulletproof mycelium sheet. So we've done a lot of cool things like that. So anyway, you grow it on, for a period of weeks in this 2x3 tray. And when you are ready to harvest, you basically peel the sheet off the top. I've had it described to me sometimes as like, imagine a sheet cake with like a thick layer of icing on the top. Imagine you could like pull that whole icing layer off. And then we stabilize it. We essentially add a fat to it, a fat liquor. And then we send it to our tannery partners, who currently are all based in Europe. And they are really skilled and knowledgeable in terms of finishing leather for the luxury industries. And so they are transferring their knowledge about how to finish and tan and dye leather to how to finish and tan and dye mycelium. And so it's a very interesting bio is a natural material. It is not literally animal collagen. So molecularly, it's different. And so there's a lot to learn, but we've managed to create, beautiful material and products that look and feel like leather. And then also some people who are looking really closely or who know leather really well are like, this is totally new and very exciting. And that's the process. Well, I like that, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, even when Phil was first really starting to work with mycelium, no one really knew what mycelium was. And there weren't as many other artists, designers, scientists, entrepreneurs working with mycelium as a material. People have known about mycelium essentially as like a supplement, a health supplement, or, mushrooms have culinary use, mushrooms have pharmaceutical use, people hadn't explored mycelium as a design material or something structural. So in the 10, 15 years since, we now have a whole field of companies and startups and artists and designers who are working with mycelium as an art material or as a material for industry. And so for me, that's the most exciting thing, which is out of, this one person's art practice and our efforts as a company that was early in the space, we've now inspired an entire new materials science field. And so there's a lot to discover. It's going to keep people busy for a very long time. There's so much to learn about mushrooms and fungi in general. If, you think about the fact that fungi were not classified as their own kingdom until 1969 or something like that. So we've studied plants and animals for a much longer time than we've studied fungi as its own specific kingdom, an organism that is neither plant nor animal for very clear and important reasons. So that's what's exciting to me, which is this is just the beginning of a new field of study and discovery and applications. And it just feels limitless as far as where mycelium can go in the world and beyond. Yeah, so there's the more obvious answer where it's it has very, very broad adoption. And so it has that impact where you're essentially, you know, removing or mitigating some of the environmental impacts that you have from the manufacturing or disposal of traditional materials and products made with traditional materials. But for me, because I'm a philosopher and I think about culture in a very broad sense, like ideological sense, I think that the large scale impact to me is a shift in mindset in terms of how you make things with natural resources. So there's the current model that is, if you think about anything that's fossil fuel based, anything that's made from plastic, anything that depends on like a monocrop, farming system, it's a system that is essentially extractive and exerts a heavy toll on the environment and the ecosystem that supports the production of whatever the resources that you're harvesting. And mycelium as a material basically is mimicking one of the most important recycling and transformative processes on Earth. So mycelium and fungi in general break down, digest, and make bioavailable all carbon-based matter. So that's why you can use fungi to clean up oil spills and to, mitigate radioactive waste sites. They basically just can process carbon-based matter, break it down, and make the biochemical components bioavailable to the environment again. I think that it starts with close observation of your environment, and think about your environment not just as like the natural world, but what is your human social environment. So any situation environment you're in, whether it's a team that you're on at school, or a club or service organization that you contribute to, or a part-time job that you have, or a project that you're really excited about with a bunch of other people working on it, there are dynamics in play in terms of resources. So how are you making it possible? What materials are you using? Who's paying for it? Whose time is going into organizing it? And how do people collaborate and deal with conflict in that space? How do people share power? Who's in the room? Who's not? Why are they in the room? Why are they not in the room? Who is this for? Who is it not for? And this is how you get to the most important questions of like the power dynamics and the cost of what you're doing, and also who you're in service to and to what end. And for me, that's transferable to whatever you feel like doing, whether it's very literally in the bioengineering, biosciences space, or if it's in a more, humanities, social sciences focused space. You want to make sure that you understand how your system works and whether you're okay with how the system works. And if you're not, then what can you introduce or change or be an agent of in order to steer it more towards the system that you want to see? Yeah. So for me, I am the easiest way to talk about my personal ethics is that they're grounded, they're materialist. It's materialism. So, and what do I mean by that? So there's like materials, right? Like actual, physical goods. And then there's also the sense of the material, like, wealth, money, resources, right? The things of value that make other things possible, that serve as a channel for like just making actions happen or making transactions happen. So I'm a materialist in the sense that I think in terms of like real hard physical realities, and that extends to the body. So if you think about like what does a person need for material survival, that's very basic, like food, water, shelter, and then it goes on from there. But there's some basics, right? Food, water, shelter. What we're doing at MicroWorks right now, selling, this like very, very nice exclusive material to luxury brands is not stuff that you need for survival, right? Like that's like luxury by definition is excess. It's more than what is baseline needed. But if you have the wealth and you have the leisure and the access, then you can afford luxuries, right? So where ethics comes in for me, for what we're doing with MicroWorks, starts within our walls. So I, as chief of culture, I'm like, all right, we're trying to create a company where we are taking care of the people within our company in a way that aligns with our values. And, that in a company has very literal meaning. Like, are you paying people enough? Are you giving them proper health benefits and support? Are you making sure that you're creating culture where everyone feels respected and can show up as their authentic selves, right? Everyone's included. There's no like us and them. Do we welcome in people who are traditionally marginalized in like corporate environments, or, the pockets of the world that are funded by venture money? So it starts with actually the material needs of the people here. And then to expand that out, the ethics of the company are, can we bring this technology and material to a large scale so that a lot of brands and companies can use it in a way that minimizes harm and negative impact either on our environment or like on the industry in terms of what we're modeling as a company. And so that's where it gets a little bit abstract, and you can get into arguments about what is good and what is bad and what is a compromise. And, we all are existing within global capitalism. So what is, how do you evaluate the goodness of what we're doing? And so that's why I'm very grounded in materialism, where I'm like, literally, who benefits, who is harmed, and you start from there, and you keep your eye on that along the way. Well, I'm in a really fortunate position at MicroWorks because I am a founder. So I was grandfathered, grandmothered in, so I'm now in like a very rare position of being like an executive leader at a biotechnology company by way of having co-founded it. I don't know that I would have been hired into this role, given my background. I mean, I have a PhD in English, like it's a very wild story how I got here. So for people looking to enter into a space like this, other than co-founding your own enterprise, which I also recommend if you're up for it and you find a good crew of people to work with, it's a fun ride, and it's intense and it's hard, but it's rewarding. What you absolutely want to do is look for the values that are visible and tangible in any project or organization that you're trying to join or sussing out, because it'll become really clear in like the interactions, the inclusion, how power is shared, who has a voice, who doesn't, whether that's a place that, you want to bring your rare skills and value and resources to. There's something to be said for being a change agent, like being that like ambassador who's able to code switch and move through a lot of different spaces. And I say code switch very seriously, because I'm an artist and academic who had to learn the language of corporate organization and management, and also like learn the language of pitching to venture capitalists. And so like, as an English major, English PhD, this was very interesting to me. For me, it's just about like, it's just learning a bunch of languages, and each one has a different value system. And, now I understand this culture, and let me go look at that culture. So you can be very fluid if you think about it like anthropologically that way, where you're like, all right, what's this environment I'm about to enter? So this goes back to that first thing I said about like the system, like an ecosystem. Like if you understand it as an ecosystem, you understand the dynamics, the historic dynamics that are there. And you also understand that it's a living system that can be shaped and steered. Just are you, is that your fight that you want to fight? And so, I have had a long history of helping white people understand racism or understand the experience of being a not white person in cultures of white supremacy, or, just even microaggressions, the world of microaggressions. Have had a long practice of helping people see and understand that. And so a really important thing for any young person setting out with those kinds of ethics and investment in changing the world that way is to have really clear boundaries about when you do that work and when you don't. And that applies to your personal relationships, but it absolutely applies in your professional environments as well. It's an important way to avoid being tokenized or exploited for, being a representative of a person of color within a space that's not fully committed to actually doing the work, everyone doing the work, whether you're a person of color or not, to raise the level of awareness and the level of dialogue that everyone's participating in. So it's really like you have to check the values of the environment and the ecosystem that you're entering to make sure that it is a supportive place for you. And if not, there's many places that are available to you in the world. And some places are a little slower to get on this ride, this journey. And, you could make the choice to be like, I'm going to help shepherd this group of people to a newer, better place. Or you could be like, you know what, someone else is going to do that work and I'm going to go over there where it feels more like this is my level. Everyone in every culture is a product of a long period of influence, right? And so it's not this is a very optimistic, positive view, but it's not any one person's 100% fault. I mean, a really, really bad person who's not getting with it has made a lot of bad choices, but it came from somewhere. They learned it somewhere. It was validated somehow by some other force and some other reward system, right? So you just think of it as a system that way, where like there's power dynamics and there's forces and there's people, again, the materialism thing is like, what are the actual forces in play? Physical, like sometimes feels physical forces, material rewards and inputs that are creating this system. And how can you be a bug in that system? Change it. Yeah. I think it depends a lot on what you want to do. So, there are, mycologists, biochemists, material scientists, engineers, on our team, process engineers on our team, who I think to learn what they know how to do, school helps, but industry helps as well. So I feel like as long as you have some baseline principles for, the technical knowledge for the area that you're interested in, and that can happen a lot of different ways. It can absolutely happen on a hands-on, apprenticeship style experiential way. And it can also happen within a school learning environment. That's really helpful. And then, there are people who are on our team who did not graduate from high school, right? Like they followed a different path. They have developed like a whole other set of skills that are like absolutely applicable to what we're doing to create our material. So, there's a lot of ways into this, to say nothing of the fact that this is a biomaterials company that was started by artists. So, Phil and I happen to have gone to college, but you don't have to go to school to be an artist. We're biased as academics. Like I think school is a great environment to meet bunch of other people. that are interested in what you're doing, but you can also do that just getting involved in interesting projects and finding, organizations that are focused on your study. I mean, one thing to say about the mycelium technology space is that because the study of fungi is so new, relatively, a lot of the knowledge about mushrooms, foraging, identifying them, what they can do, came from peer-to-peer DIY networks. So it was people just learning about mushrooms on their own, going on mushroom foraging walks, creating like mycological societies to share information. A lot of the information about, or the knowledge about like cultivating mushrooms actually came out of people understanding the medicinal and like, the medicinal and sacred, like ritual-based use for mushrooms. So people basically growing psychedelic mushrooms and understanding like, oh, here's how you create a clean environment to make sure that you grow the mushrooms that you want. So a lot of the knowledge of mycelium technology came out of non-institutional sources. So absolutely just community, peer-to-peer learning. So a lot of wisdom to be found outside of institutions. Well, it's more like if I could live like a bunch of different lives, because I wouldn't want to lose what I did, because it's so, and like I've always loved stories and reading and writing. So I think the path of English and literature makes sense. And I'm also an artist. So the path of like deepening into art practice and actually having some like college-based, studio practice, like as a foundation helped me. But I'm also really interested in philosophy and law. And of course, like, it's sort of like I get my biological sciences information sort of by osmosis, by like everything's around, like by the company that's around me, the people around me. So in a way, I feel sort of satisfied there, but I feel like I would definitely find the study of philosophy and law really, really interesting, because I think similar to my interest in steering culture, there's a lot of assumptions that people have made, like values assumptions about what is good, what is bad, what's the right way to organize a group of people, what, like, why you need to have nations, why you need to have states, like why you even need to have certain kinds of like legal structures or like governance structures. That stuff we just made up along the way. And at some point, certain things got like just rigid, like this is how it has to be. And I don't think things do not have to be that way. Like I said, everything is steerable. And so it'd be interesting to like know all the arguments and to know the key turning points for when certain structures solidified, so that you could like twist it. You could go back and be like, well, that is assuming this, this, and this. And now we know that those assumptions are wrong. Or we know that that led to some bad stuff in terms of oppression and hierarchies. And maybe we go back to that turning point and we shift the assumption there and see what happens. So that's interesting to me, is to like have like, because if you know history, then you know how to not repeat it. You know what to do differently. Well, I'll give a really literal materialist answer. So what we're working on right now with MycoWorks is we are building our first commercial scale facility. So our factory here in Emeryville, California does 10,000 sheets a year, which sounds like a lot, but for a company like, Nike or Adidas, like you named before, like they need a whole lot more material to even release one product, right? So what we're doing right now is we're building another factory in South Carolina, and it's going to be 100,000 square feet in size. And we're going to be able to produce several millions of square feet of our material per year. So that is getting to numbers that are actually relevant for a large brand. Or for instance, as a company, we just announced a partnership with GM, which, as you know, makes vehicles, cars. And so the idea is they will be a strategic partner for us in scaling our processes and our technology and our product volumes so that we can be relevant to the auto industry. And so the volumes that you're looking at there, think about like all the places in the interior of a car where you have leather or a leather alternative like a pleather. That's where we're headed. So the world will be different once we build and prove out this factory and show we can do it, because at that point it's like, oh, this is now possible. And so the next question is just, where's the next factory? And then the next 10, right? 20 or whatever. So it's going to be a really, really big pivot point for this materials science space at large. And then for us as a company, when that factory turns on and is working and is at full capacity, and that'll be sometime between 2023 and 2024. Oh, the non-material answer. I mean, I think that, it goes back to the answer that I gave before, which was the shift. Yeah. Like the early tagline that I wrote for the company was, let's change the way things are made. And it's a little broad, but I still live by it, because it's like, if you can show the world that you can make things using a process that is very like holistically beneficial, because you're using waste materials and you're processing waste materials into something of value, and then it can break down and be, beneficial, non harmful to the environment, and you can show that it works and it can be profitable, and it's not like you don't have to compromise in terms of the performance and the aesthetics of the product that you get, then that gives people the incentive to keep working in that direction. And so that is the immaterial answer, which is also very material, because if we can change the way things are made, then literally we're going to change the way things are made.